So you read the title of the video. Today I'm going to be talking about why I no longer eat pork as a Christian. So I stopped eating pork randomly and unexpectedly, cold turkey about 6 weeks ago when I came across a random live stream YouTube video called Christmas Ham versus Passover Lamb. And I was exposed to certain things I hadn't thought about before. And then when I went back and read the verses that people typically use to say that we no longer have to follow the Old Testament laws, and really looked into it with an open heart and not from the biased perspective of I currently eat pork pretty much every day, and I kind of don't want this to be true. And the mainstream narrative is that it's not true, that we still have to, that we can no longer eat pork. So I kind of wanted to believe it, and then when I was able to look at it with fresh eyes, I changed my mind. So this is not, as a disclaimer, this is not a 100% teaching. This is what I'm currently doing for myself, because based on what I'm read, I'm not confident at all that we can't eat pork. And with what they use, I mean, I'm just not willing to take that chance. Pretty much, I'm not willing to take that chance. Today I'm just explaining why exactly I feel that way. Okay, so first thing you see they use is Mark 7. So just to give you some background in Mark 7, I'm gonna read the beginning. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as washing of cups and pitchers and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands? He replied, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. Their teachings are merely human rules. So the way I take it is, what he's about to say is regarding the human rules, not the laws of God. Not the laws of God. It's talking about the human rules. I feel the same way. These human rules people have are ridiculous, right? But okay, let's keep going. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And he continued, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. I believe this is very popular in the church today. That's a personal belief, but I always use scripture to back up my belief, right? For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is Corban, that is devoted to God, then you no longer let them do anything for their father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many things like that. This is Jesus talking, by the way. Then he says in verse 14, again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. After he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. Are you so dull, he asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach and then out of their body. And then in these newer translations like the NIV, NLT, the translators add in parentheses after this, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. That's not in the Bible, by the way. I'm not saying all foods aren't clean. I'm just giving you my opinion, but it's not in the opinion to let you know that's not in the Bible, that's not in the Greek. That's why you don't find it in the King James, right? That's just something that they add to let you like, oh, this is what he did by this, but we don't know that, right? That's a belief. So just something to add really quickly. So at the time that I was shooting a video, I didn't remember that Matthew 15 talks about the same exact story when Jesus was speaking to the Pharisees. And he provides even more understanding into exactly what Jesus was talking about. So starting at verse 16, it says, are you still so dull? Jesus asked them. Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person. But eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. So Matthew did not understand what Jesus was talking about. He was there, as in he was making all foods clean. He said, eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. If you go back to the beginning of Matthew 15, back to the beginning of Mark 7, that's clearly what they were discussing. That was the topic. So if this is talking about the same story, if Mark 7 is proof, if Mark 7 is proof that the dietary laws no longer apply to Christians today, why do they always go to Mark 7 and they never quote Matthew 15? They never go to Matthew 15 to prove their point, because Matthew 15 is way more exact in explaining what Jesus was discussing and what he was talking about, as opposed to Mark 7, when, even though I still believe it's still pretty obvious that he's not overturning a command of God after he was just reprimanding the Pharisees for having a fine way of overturning the commands of God. He was clearly talking about their man-made rule. They typically use Mark 7 and Acts 10. Coincidentally enough, I think Acts 10 disproves Mark 7. Or Acts 15 is one of those. I think it's Acts 10. With Peter's vision, Acts 15 is when the apostles gave us the laws to follow. So we'll see that in a few minutes. But the reason why I don't believe Mark 7 is making all foods clean, because Jesus was just talking about them. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. Then he says you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. I don't think in that same conversation he was planning to override a standing command of God. I don't think that. That doesn't make any sense, actually, right? When he said nothing that enters outside of a person can defile them, he was talking about the fact that the hands were defiled. That's what he was talking about. That's what he was talking about. Because if you consider this a blanket, if you consider that statement a blanket, nothing that comes from the outside, nothing that enters a man's mouth can defile him, because it doesn't go in their heart, it goes into their stomach and then out of their body. That's if you take it as a blanket thing, just towards everything, then it wouldn't make any sense why it would be a command for us not to be able to eat food offered to idols, because that's still food. It still came from the outside and came in through our mouth and went through our stomach, and we got rid of it. It's the same concept, guys. You can't say that matters, but you can't say that matters, but this is a blanket. No food at all can defile a person. That's not what he was addressing. He was actually talking about. He just said you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God, and we use this same speech to completely override a command of God. I don't agree with that. All right, let's go to Acts 10. I don't want this video to be too long, since it's really my personal opinion. But I do think it's important. And once I get to Isaiah 66, you will see why I believe that it is so important. So, Acts 10, Peter has a vision. I'm going to start at verse 9. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven open and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the man sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. But I'm going to the verse to where Peter. Okay. Then if you go to verse 27, you see what Peter took from the vision. He said, while talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. He said to them, "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean." Now, they tell us what the vision meant. Tell us, right? We will have to use an alternative meaning or a secondary meaning to add to it. So it was a vision. Peter never ate the food. I can understand why this can be misconstrued, and maybe I can understand why I'm misconstruing it, because again, I can be wrong. But this at least disproves Mark 7, at the very minimum, from declaring all foods clean. Because the book of Acts is after the lifetime of Jesus. This is after Jesus already passed away, right? So in Mark 7, if Jesus declared all foods clean, then why in the world would one of his apostles, one of his closest apostles, Peter, still believe that there is food that is unclean? I just don't understand that. Peter was close to Jesus. He had a better understanding of what Jesus was talking about than we do. Again, if Jesus declared all food clean, then why would Peter still see certain food as unclean? That doesn't make any sense. I looked it up because not too much about it. People actually have said that. I'm not even about to write anything. People have actually said that. Oh well, we know Peter wasn't fully submitted to God, because in Acts 10 he was still calling food unclean, and we know Jesus in Mark 7 declared all foods clean. They think it's more like it's like it doesn't even come to us that maybe we're the ones misunderstanding what Jesus was talking about, not Peter. Or Peter wasn't being disobedient, or he wasn't confused or anything. Maybe there was still foods that were unclean. There's a possibility, but that seems like the more likely possibility. Also, at Acts 15, I believe, and I'm not going to take, Peter wasn't going around telling people, oh, we can eat pork now, there's no unclean animals. He told them what the vision meant, right? It was about the Gentiles. He didn't actually at any point start actually eating pork, right? So, Acts 15, I think Acts 15 also disproves the understanding in Mark 7. Well, I don't think it disproves it. It does disprove it. Because it gave us 3 laws to follow. So there was debating about following the law of Moses and circumcision and all that stuff. And then it was decided, it is my judgment, therefore, Acts 15, verse 19. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from meat of strangled animals, and from blood. For the law of Moses has been preached in every city from the earliest times, and it is read in the synagogues on every Sabbath. Okay. So 2 of the 3 laws that it gave us sexual morality, right? And also this goes with the whole sin is sin, all sin is equal. That's absolute crap. That is not true at all. That is a horrible doctrine, because all it ends up doing is, for one, it's not biblical, and it ends up justifying these bigger sins, these sins that do hold more weight to, I stole a pencil or something. I mean, that is ridiculous. No, you should not be out there stealing pencils, but people who try to do that to make themselves feel better about their adultery or their fornication or anything of that nature, I would not suggest it, and it's unbiblical. But back on topic, it said to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. Why? Nothing that goes in a man's mouth can defile him. If that's a blanket statement, then why would 2 of the 3 commands, they only gave the Gentiles 3 commands to start with, and those clearly aren't the only commands for us to follow. That's why they said in verse 21, for the law of Moses has been preached in every city from the earliest times, and is read in the synagogues on every Sabbath. They were saying we're going to still be learning. Those aren't the only 3. That doesn't make any sense. That would go against the rest of the New Testament. But how can something, it doesn't matter if it's polluted by idols, guys, because it's still a food going into our mouth. It can't defile us. That's the logical conclusion you have to go to when you make Jesus' statement a blanket statement and not just about what he was dealing with in that moment, which is the whole. It was a man-made rule that you had to wash your hands. That's it. That is it. He literally talked about not setting aside the commands of God, and you guys are using it to set aside the command of God. I just don't agree with that. I just think that's bad. That's not right. Correctly dividing the word from my current limited perspective. Right? It's even repeated in Revelation 2. So Revelation 2 verse 20, it says, "Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols." Again, if no food can defile a man, because it comes from the outside of the body, not from his heart, and that was meant to be a blanket statement, why would Jesus here be caring about food, us eating food sacrificed to idols? Obviously, there is food that can defile us. They didn't consider pork food. It was never food to them. It was just never food. Every time they said food, every time they said meats, I don't believe they was talking about pork. That just didn't even cross their mind. Right? I don't write Maccabees on here, but in Maccabees it shows Jews dying to not eat pork. It shows them, and that's what really changed my mind about it, reading Maccabees, and I'm just like, hold up. For this to be overturned, it needed to be something concrete. Like, this is something that you mentioned on Sermon of the Mount. Like, I know we said of times of old that you're not supposed to eat pork, but you can now, right? But even if he did that, they would have just said he's not the Messiah anyways, right? Like, so we have to make it make sense. Yeah, we have to make it make sense. I really don't think that's what happens, guys. And I still have a little more to go, but these are going to be a lot shorter. So, yeah, that's in Revelation as well. So now looking at Romans 14. First, that's one I forgot. I believe I forgot 1 Timothy. So I'm going to make sure that I don't forget that one. It's 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy is one of those. I believe it's first. Yeah, it's 1 Timothy that I wanted to address. Yep, 1 Timothy chapter 4. All right, we're going to make sure we get to that one too. But Romans 14. Let's look at Romans 14 that a lot of people also use. And I'm not attacking anyone. To me, this isn't a like an obvious thing that people are purposely lying about and being dishonest about, like polygyny is. This is something that I feel like you can easily get wrong, especially since we're taught that you can do it for so long, and then it becomes a normal part of our diet. But you have to look at the Bible with fresh eyes, right? So, looking at Romans 14, starting at verse 1. Accept the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats anything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. So Paul was dealing with a belief that we can no longer eat meat, right? Like some people have argued, oh, well, in the garden they didn't eat meat, so we can't eat meat anymore. And that was the doctrine he was dealing with. That's why he goes from eating everything to eating only vegetables. He specified what he was talking about. This is very important when understanding what he was probably discussing in 1 Timothy. Let's look at it as well in King James. This video is longer than expected, but no problem because this is important to talk about. Just in case I am right. Hopefully it says, him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eat of herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, for God hath received him. Okay, so again, this can be, you can eat anything under the sun. I mean, this can mean that. I truly don't believe it. I think it's one of those situations to where obviously they're talking about food. Because if you can eat everything, then why can't you eat food offered to idols? Why can't you eat meat strangled in blood that like it was talking about in Acts 15? If you can eat everything and nothing matters based on Romans 14 and Mark 7. I think it's like this. If I'm calling a friend and I say, hey man, I'm just over here barbecuing, grilling, and I know you was talking about looking into like becoming a vegan or something, but I was just calling you still eat meat? They say, yeah, I eat meat, man. Yeah, I was just looking into it. My wife was talking to me about it, but I still eat meat. Cool. And then if they came over, there are certain meat. They just said meat. I never said what I was grilling, but there's a certain expectation of what I'm grilling. They're gonna assume I'm grilling beef from cows, maybe some bison, maybe some venison or deer, probably some hot dogs or something, which is beef and pork, because we consider pork food now. Maybe some ribs, maybe some steaks, right? If I said that if they came over and they said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, I got pit bull and I got orange cat on the grill." They'd be like, "Alonzo, what are you talking about?" And I said, "I was grilling meat, bro. That's meat. That's meat. What are you talking about?" No one in their right mind will assume that I'm grilling dog. No one. Like, we have to be careful to read it how it would have been intended. And when I say this, when I say be careful, I'm not saying that I'm 100% right. I'm just saying what I'm currently thinking. But does that make sense? That even if we said, "Oh, I'm grilling meat," you're gonna have meat in your head. They didn't eat pork. They didn't eat pork. Pork was not a thing that they ate, right? Okay. So now we jump over to 1 Timothy 4. So 1 Timothy 4 verses 1 through 5. The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings will come through hypocritical liars whose consciences, I said that word wrong, have been seared as with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received for thanksgiving, because it is consecrated by the word of God and prayer. Some people may take this to mean that if you just pray over food is good, but obviously we know not, because if you have food given by idols or meat strangled, then you can't just pray over it, right? Because that goes against what we were told. But just going into that, when it says to abstain from certain foods, they did not consider pork food. That's really my thinking. It just didn't consider pork food, not even a little bit. And there's no way that something that God's chosen people died over, that was in God's law, can all of a sudden become a doctrine taught by demons. It's within the confines of what was already taught, right? So we also see that they're going to forbid to marry. And a lot of Protestants say that's Catholic Church because they don't let priests marry, and they're probably right. But we still say that's within the confines of what was taught. We forbid homosexual marriages. We don't consider that. Well, see, they say it was going to forbid to marry. We then go back and see what was already taught. Most Christians forbid polygynous marriage, and that was never taught against. I think that's a Pharisee thing in the new church, because it's a man-made rule. But they forbid that, and they don't think that's a doctrine taught by demons, because they obviously feel like, well, this is within the confines of what was already taught. So I believe it would be the same thing with food. And then the objection is typically, this was only for Israel. This was only for Israel, only for Israel. God wanted them to be set apart, which when people say that, God didn't just choose random stuff for them to be different, by the way. It wasn't just random things he chose for the sake of them being different and set apart. There was things he chose for a reason. There was logic behind it. But they said that this whole clean, unclean thing, you can't eat certain things, was only for Israel. Respectfully, I disagree because of Genesis 7, which is before the law. So you go to Genesis 7 and you read verses 1 and 2. Clean and unclean food was already established. It was already established, right? So this is about Noah, the ark. You know that story. So listen to what it says. So I know most people are taught that every animal, it was two of each animal, right? This is what it says. The Lord then said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. Yada yada yada. Why is there a distinction there? Why are you taking if they're all meant before Israel, before the law, if they're all meant to be eaten as food, then why am I taking 7 pairs, right, versus one? I have 14 of this animal, and I have 2 of this animal, but I eat them the same. It's like they serve a purpose other than being consumed as food. I think it was already, so even if you go back to the garden, they was vegetarian. So then right after the garden, then there's already clean and unclean animals. So it's almost like there was never a time where pork was being consumed as a normal thing, right? And then the last thing is Isaiah 66. I already mentioned 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Actually, after that live stream, I went to Barnes Noble and got the Apocrypha just because of that. Because I'm just like, there's a lot of history in here. Even if you don't believe these are inspired, they're at least deuterocanonical. The history is accurate, right? So, last passage I'm going to go to is Isaiah. And this is pretty much this was pretty much it for me. Once I read this, I don't think it's metaphorical. I think it's plainly what it's talking about. But I can be wrong once again. I can once again be wrong. So we all hear that when God destroyed the world the first time by water, he would not do that again. The second time he would destroy it by fire. And then I came across this, and I felt like when I was reading it, I thought he was talking about the second coming. So I didn't change my opinion about it being the second coming just because I read something that I was just like sheesh about. You know what I mean? Isaiah 66, verses 15 through 17. See, the Lord is coming with fire, and his chariots are like a whirlwind. He will bring down his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For with fire and with his sword, the Lord will execute judgment on all people, and many will be those slain by the Lord. Who will those be? Those who consecrate and purify themselves to go into the gardens, following one who was among those who eat the flesh of pigs, rats, and other unclean things. They will meet their end together with the one they follow, declares the Lord. I don't take that as metaphorical. I really don't. I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, we know Jesus overrid it in Matthew 7. It's like the Sudoku thing I posted, right? It's like you're so married to your current understanding of this one verse that you're bending everything else, and maybe you're bending it correctly, but from where I stand right now, you're bending everything else to fit into that current understanding. Maybe you just got that wrong. If that's talking about the second coming, and it seems like it is, then why would he say that he's going to judge those who eat the flesh of pigs, rats, and other unclean things if he knew that before that judgment came, he was going to make all things clean? I just don't understand. I just don't understand that. And like, this is not something I planned. I ate pork pretty much every single day. I either eat a ham and cheese omelet with toast. I eat a sandwich or a sub of some kind. That was always ham and cheese. I eat pork and beans and wieners with rice. That's my favorite meal, pork and beans, wieners with rice. Second favorite meal is a burger. I always got bacon on my burger. And I eat, if you're watching this, you know how I eat. I eat a burger like 3, 4, 5 times a week. I eat pizza all the time. I always got pepperoni and sausage. I always ate bacon and sausage with my breakfast. If it wasn't like an omelet, it was like eggs and grits and toast or whatever, or biscuits. I ate pork pretty much every single day. And I just stopped cold turkey because maybe it's a personal conviction, but I honestly don't believe it is. Right? I just would not bet, based on Isaiah 66, I would not bet my salvation on Mark 7 and Acts 10. I wouldn't, because both of these, that's not convincing enough at all. Not even a little bit. Right? So that's just why I currently do what I do and no longer eat pork. So thanks for watching the video.